Welcome, fitness enthusiasts and ultimate Frisbee aficionados, to the TOBU Fitness Podcast, your guide to elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate Frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. Whether you're a seasoned player or just stepping onto the field for the first time, this podcast is your one-stop destination for unlocking your true potential. This is the TOBU Fitness Podcast with your host, certified strength and conditioning coach, John Shelley.
What's going on, Ultimate people? Before we get started with this video, I just want to do a quick plug. Please like and subscribe my boy Justin's videos. It does a lot for his channel. So like I said, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 12. Got a great guest on today. This is John Shelley from Houston Havoc and then San Antonio Alamode. Shelley, how you doing?
I'm great, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on. Do you want to tell people a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I started playing Frisbee in like 2015. Had a good buddy who actually just made nationals on Blueprint for the first time. Get me into Frisbee. Played 3 years of college, mixed and open. Played 2 years of mixed club on Long Island, it was amazing, a lot of fun. Then came down here to San Antonio, played 3 years for Alamode, captain all 3 years, and actually played my first pro year last year with the Houston Havoc.
Nice, awesome. And I'm excited about this show because, like we just talked about, like this is our second time recording this episode now. So hopefully for the listeners, this is a perfect episode because I've never had a chance to do an episode twice. So hopefully we'll get it done. It'll be a quality episode. But yeah, you said captaining Houston or captaining Alamode and then playing in the AUDL. I want to start off by asking you a little bit about the leadership side of it. So what it's like to captain, because I think there are a lot of people out there that, you know, maybe just because they're a junior or senior on their college team, they automatically take on that role of being the captain, or they're just one of the better players, so they automatically become captain. And sometimes we lack the actual leadership principles that come with being a captain. Can you talk a little bit about your mindset going into being a captain? What are some of the principles that you apply?
The first thing that comes to mind is definitely consistency. If you give your players consistency and predictability, they'll generally like you more as a leader. Whereas if you give them a little bit of hot and cold, they'll generally have an issue with you. The way that kind of comes into play as a captain is, you try to have like your mission statement and stuff like that. And I try to not make decisions based on like how I'm feeling or like what I think of a specific issue, but what decision would be most consistent with our mission statement as a team. And so giving that level of consistency for the team, I feel like we haven't had a lot of dissenting opinions or like issues on the team because they all know what they're going to get. So that'd be my biggest advice.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I admired about how you and Gavin captained the team and just Alamode seemed like culture in general was just like something I've noticed in other teams is that there's too many cooks in the kitchen type thing. And it seemed like with Alamode, everybody was very unified. And even if they didn't agree on something, like we were all going towards that same mission statement, which was pretty cool. Do you have any advice for captains, like when they're creating that mission statement?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that helped Gavin and I was like disassociating results from goals. And so I feel like too often like people have goals like to go to regionals, to go to nationals, to beat X team, and having goals like having like very finite goals that are like either like too achievable or not achievable enough. I feel like people get the wrong negative and positive reinforcement. So on Alamode, our mission was to develop players perfectly, right? To do as best as we possibly could. And so that's our goal. And then our result, which was disassociated for that, was making select flight for the last 2 years and beating some teams that we're really stoked about, competing with. So that's how I would take on the mission statement. It's just disassociating completely from your results.
Yeah, I like that. And I think to provide maybe more context to other people too, it's like, I think I'm going to keep relating back to college captains because I think that's kind of the demographic that maybe might benefit from this most, but it's just like the idea of like helping younger players develop versus just like, hey, we've got to make regionals or we've got to make nationals, like along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, if you are driving towards a goal that leads to people getting better, your results are going to get better. And then on the other side, right, like if your goal is to make nationals, let's say, or like win nationals, and then like you win nationals, then like what's next, right? Like what your goal just ended. There's no more goal, and like a goal becomes redundant if it's like win nationals every year, winning nationals every year. So I think it's important to have something that goes beyond just like some finite result.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for you as a player, how can you kind of focus on your own game and your own skill set that you bring to the team while also focusing on all your captaining responsibilities and taking on everybody else?
Honestly, it is so hard. And like you hear it every year that people like will put their personal growth on the side for like the benefit of the team. I think the biggest thing that helped me is like, you know, in my job in the Army, like I'm a leader. And so like I'm used to some like the things that come with leadership. And the biggest one is delegation, right? Like I couldn't have gone to Houston Havoc practices for the first half of the club year if I didn't have someone I could confidently delegate my Alamode Saturday practices to. And so it's like, it's understanding that not everything falls on our shoulders. We also had D-line leader and an O-line leader, someone who's responsible for the strategy of the O and D-line. Of course, like guided by Gavin and I. But at the end of the day, like we're the ones making the decisions. They're the ones driving a lot of the change. And just being able to delegate a lot of that frees up a lot of space for me to be able to work on myself. And even do something selfish like play for another team while I'm captaining the club team.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to talk a little bit more about those systems that you put in place? Like you talked about the O and D line leaders, but also something that I know other teams do, and everybody has a different name for it. But like we had the water buddy system. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I just think it's unrealistic for, or like in my experience, it's unrealistic for captains to be able to hold 26 plus practice players accountable. And so we have the captains who are, you know, the end all be all decision makers. Everyone's on the same page with the captains. We had the line leaders who were more or less in charge of about 13 dudes, O and D line. And then beyond that, you're put in a group of 3 with 2 of your buddies that you got to choose from. Either the O-line, if you're on the O-line, you get a D and a sub, just so they can watch you while you're on the field. And they're responsible for holding you accountable on like the micro things, right? So macro, like I got to make sure you show up on time and I got to make sure you're in the right uniform and do like knowing the strategy. But micro, you know, your buddy's got to make sure that you're hydrating, eating enough, sweating enough during the week and getting enough workouts in, right? And just something that like as a leader I couldn't do, but as we talked about, you know, 2 minutes ago, it's that delegation piece. And I not only was I able to delegate to the line leaders, but also that I was able to delegate to 26 people to hold those other 26 people accountable.
I have a college client who kind of had a similar issue where he's the captain of his team, and I helped his team out with a workout program for winter break. And we were kind of, as we were checking in about how the team was doing, he was kind of saying like, yeah, he's got some guys that train, do it. Some guys he's not quite sure. Some guys he definitely knows aren't doing it. And then we talked about exactly that, like kind of creating that like water buddy system where it's like, you know, as the captain, you can't, you know, be on everybody's like tail trying to figure out if they're working out. And it's like, that's also something way too like detailed and small, like, kind of small level for like a captain to be thinking, right? Like delegate that to like pair them up, give them buddies so that they can hold each other kind of accountable too.
So actually I had this conversation with Jacob because so Jacob Rosen, Alamode player, also captain for the UTSA men's club team. He all the time was like, who do I invest in? How do I invest in people? Because like there's so many different skill disparities, and you just have that small group that like gets ahead of everyone else. And so slightly different than a club team where, you know, you generally have 22 to 26 motivated people, maybe not all 26 every time, versus a college team, especially like, you know, not a D1 go to Natty's college team, but, you know, your run-of-the-mill college team. A lot of times you'll maybe have like 3, 4, 5 underclassmen who are motivated. And what I try to guide Jacob to do is invest in them, make them the guiding coalition. I forget what book I stole that from, but make them a guiding coalition, invest in them, and like have them basically like farm up the next guys. So that's kind of what I did was when I was in college. When I was a junior, that freshman class, I really invested a lot, especially the dudes that were playing in high school and like came to college to play. And I didn't invest in all of them. You know, I took like the 5 or 6 most motivated, but then they were the ones to motivate, you know, the freshmen the next year, and it was kind of so on and so forth. And so I think it's really tough to motivate everyone on a college team, especially because we all kind of start the sport as a hobby and not as a sport. But those kids that like get it and want to treat it as a sport, I would spend the most time investing in them with the expectation that they do the same to the next classes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think something kind of important to realize too is like it's hard to invest in people that don't want to be there necessarily. So like you're saying, like if people want to treat it as a hobby, like there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think if you listen to like the origin story of a lot of the best players, like I was listening to the Christian Boxley like interview for Rowan McDonald's podcast, and he was talking about how like he first joined Georgetown University's team, and had no intention of like playing again the next year, but it was because of like a tough loss in regionals that he got motivated to join again. And it's like, I think it's okay for guys to have that like natural progression of like learning if they want to play or not, and we don't necessarily have to like shove it down their throat. So I like that idea of like investing in the people that are like really there, and then other people are going to kind of tag along eventually. Cool. Last question, kind of on the leadership topic. I made this kind of same joke for the first time we were recording, but I know how you feel about this topic, but a good question I get a lot is, does the captain also have to be the best player of the team? Some people think that you have to be, because you have to guide and lead through your skill, while some people think that it should just be the best leader and skill doesn't necessarily matter. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I lean on like it is most easy if it's the best player, right? And generally, this just like organically happens that the best player becomes the captain. But I would say if you are not the best player, but you show the most leadership qualities, then it's important that you don't fall behind on like at least the mental side of Frisbee, right? Like you know all the plays, you know all the strategies, and although you can't implement them the same way that the best players do, it's always important to like be able to give them feedback, or else they kind of just run away with like the strategy by themselves, and like you have to defer to them more often than you'd like to. If you're going to be that leader, like you need to own it, and you need to like have the cognitive ability to like drive the strategy. But if you're deferring to the better player because like they played club and they know all about host stacks and vert stacks, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice being the leader instead of that person.
Yeah. Do you have any advice then for kind of ways where you can be like a motivating driver for the team if it's not through your play? So let's say like, late game scenario, your team's down or it's universe point or something, like how, if you're not the best player on the team, how can you kind of step up and still be in that leadership position?
I think the biggest thing for me, we kind of talked about earlier, is consistency, right? You kind of talked about like late in the game, what do you do? I think it starts 0-0 first point, and it's like having intentionality, like let's break early, let's get the O-line, oh yeah, cheers out, or whatever teams do, and just like intentionality when it comes to being a good teammate. I feel like there's so many things I can go into like that make a good teammate, but chanting, getting water for the homies, reminding them when they have timeouts and when they don't have timeouts, just all those like little things, helping the coaches with subs, whatever it may be. I feel like that's what it means to be like a good leader outside of being the best player.
Yeah, I like that. Cool. Let's shift gears a little bit here. You mentioned you played your first season in the AUDL with Houston Havoc. What was that experience like?
Amazing. I've never played in front of like that many people before, especially like the first game was crazy. I couldn't hear anything. And yeah, I mean, the best part about it was like I just played with some incredible players like Chibizura, eBay, Matt Bennett. Like I think the biggest thing I took out was like the lessons I learned from their decades of experience combined, was just like an incredible opportunity for me who like has really only played at like the regionals club level for the longest time.
Well, what did you find were the biggest differences between club and AUDL play?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy thing to say is like caliber of players. The one thing I like the most, and if I ever switch to like caring more about AUDL than I do club, it's just like the impact on your body. It's really fun when you're in college to play 7 games in a weekend and you want to play every single point. And then club, it kind of changes and you're like, okay, 7 games is fine, 6 is preferred, but like I still want to play every other point. And I'm at the point where like, man, if I end up on a D-line, like I want to play maybe 50% of the points, but like we'll be less greedy with points in games where we get ahead, just because I've had the experience with the AUDL where it's like 1 game a day, and I feel like that's so much more sustainable. And like, I mean, you're the physical trainer, right? Like, I don't think you'd ever recommend to play 7 games in 2 days.
No, definitely not.
Horrible. No other sport does that.
No.
And so I think if I ever make that switch, it's probably going to be for my body. Playing 1 game, maybe 2 games a weekend is just like so sustainable, and it feels so good. And I feel like I can give so much to that game in the moment. Where in club, it's like, we play hip, and I'm like, okay, time to give it literally my everything, and like we lose on UP, and then it's like, okay, we're playing against Brawl for the first time in the season at sectional. It's like time to give everything, even though I just gave everything, and like there's no way that's a sustainable way to like take care of your body.
Right. Now, a couple of AUDL players that I've talked to have said that even though it's one AUDL game that you have, that AUDL game is like almost as tiring as a club tournament. I guess just because of the nature of AUDL, bigger fields, you're running a lot more. It's obviously a longer game too compared to one club game. Did you notice that at all?
I think the one thing there's a couple things that I felt, right? The first thing was points are so fast, right? 'Cause I don't play a lot of observed games. And even if I did play observed games, AUDL points go faster. And so that's something I felt, plus the bigger field. It felt more like, I felt like I had a good time because I was ready in terms of cardio. But in terms of like load over a day or a weekend, it's obvious. Like I don't think it's inarguably better for you, right? Because you're only playing one game. But I understand like why people would get tired because like it's more of a 2-hour sprint, whereas like a club tournament you're kind of going for longer, and so I can understand why in the moment they may feel more tired, but like in terms of load on your body and exhaustion, I think it's inarguably that like a 7-game club tournament is so much worse.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so do you feel like kind of your skill set as a handler, did that change a little bit too, like going from AUDL or going between AUDL and club? Like I guess what you were thinking about as a handler, did that change at all?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would really commend the Havoc for was like their offensive systems. I really had a lot of fun playing the set that we had, and the biggest thing was like lateral movement, and obviously you can facilitate more lateral movement because you have a whole extra 10 yards to work with. And so, I mean, we used to joke about like who had the most horizontal yards on the team, and like there are some times where like I'm throwing 40-yard, like they're not considered hucks, right? But like 40-yard, like not just like lasers to their chest, but like I'm putting touch and like shape on it to gain 1 yard to like Ben Lewis on the complete opposite side of the field. And so it definitely challenged me to like look at the field differently. Even at practice, sometimes they would like challenge us to look at like even face the field horizontally to like facilitate those throws. Because if you're always looking towards the end zone that you're trying to throw to, you kind of take away some options from yourself, and you kind of let the mark cheat a little bit. And so especially if you're trying to facilitate horizontal movement, sometimes it makes a lot more sense to like no shit, like face your mark, almost like in a 3-man mark, and like it kind of makes it easier for you to have more options to throw that. We call it like the 40-yard throw in club, getting it from one sideline to the other sideline.
That's interesting. Can you kind of dive a little bit deeper then into maybe like your progressions when you're a handler too? So I imagine in club, you might not have to be like as exaggerated with kind of looking horizontally into the field, whereas AUDL, that bigger field, you have to. But yeah, can you just kind of talk about like generally speaking, what's your progression when you're looking at different options?
So it's all context, right? So if I just got a reset, obviously like the open side is the first thing you should always be looking at. If I received a swing, I obviously want to look to continue to the side that it's swinging towards. Especially on Havoc, like they really, regardless if it was the 4 sideline or the break sideline, they really wanted me to hit that swing, which was something I had to break because like my college club mind is like 4 side bad, but the AUDL is like we have so much space to work with and such competent throwers that we're okay with being stuck on a sideline. So yeah, I mean the progression really goes like grab disc. I generally have already like checked the field and what's going on before I make my reset cut. Open side, inside, break side, and then after those 4 seconds of the open side inside, I try to stay on that break side and stay with my handlers for the next. And in AUDL you only have 7 seconds, so the next 3 seconds, but it feels like 10 seconds in club. Like they feel the same because people count so fast in club, myself included. So yeah, I try to stay with the handlers until we reset, and that's my progression, right? Is open side, inside, break side.
See, and do you have any advice for maybe younger handlers or just handlers looking to improve? Maybe how they can work on that skill? Is it something where you just got to rep it out?
Yeah, it's repping intentionally. I think the one thing watching myself a lot on Alamode that and like even I've been watching a lot of like 2023 natties recently, is as much as it's important to hit those swings, like I just talked about how important it is to like go with the swing and swing that. There's also something to be said about deliberately looking that off, going against the grain, and kind of doing a dishy swish back up the field. So I think it's important to be versatile. I think it's important to watch other players, and just like I really subscribe to what you always say, which is like the best way to get better Frisbee is playing more Frisbee, right? The best way to get better cardio for Frisbee is play more Frisbee. So my advice is in line with yours, which is let's just play more Frisbee.
Right. Absolutely. Now, yeah, well, yeah, that is my general advice. But I also always like to just kind of like dive in a little bit deeper. Do you think, like, just kind of going off the top of your head, do you think there are any like specific drills that kind of emulate this well, or there kind of tactics you can do when watching film, anything like that?
Okay, so I'll start with drills. I've always been a proponent of 3-man mark. I think it's a good drill. We did another one on Alamode this year, which was we had a pretty like shaded like 90 degrees, just like covering the break side mark, and then we put someone poached, and we were trying to like deliberately have that poach like force the cutter to go somewhere. I also think just volume of throwing is important. We talked about this, the last time. It's practice not until you get it right, but until you can't get it wrong. And then once you're operating in that space of you can't get it wrong, then you can allocate more of your thinking to, what should I be looking at, instead of like, I still watch regionals level players look at their hand when they're throwing, or like look at the disc. It's like, if you're not looking at where you're like every sport ever, you look where you're throwing. But because I think everyone starts Frisbee at that like hobby college level, that we sometimes don't break out of all of the habits. And I've been throwing a lot recently in preparation for the AUDL. And I still see dudes like looking at the hand that they're throwing with. And so it's freeing up that mental space by increasing your volume of throwing. That I think would help you on the field practically.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the way I always think about it is more, I guess, like on a defensive side. Like I always preach improving athleticism, and no matter how people think about that, I always think it's like if I'm guarding somebody and I know that they are way faster than me, my only thought is don't get beat, and then suddenly my field sense gets a lot worse, my defensive positioning gets a lot worse because I'm so reactive to everything. But if I know that I'm faster than the person I'm guarding, suddenly I'm not as worried about that, and I can use a lot more of like my cognitive space to actually think about where the disc is, where am I positioned and stuff. So I think it's very similar. Like if you're more confident with your throws, you have more brain space for pretty much everything else.
And I think on the same vein, it's like you have more options, right? When you're more athletic or you're a better thrower, it opens up more options, and again, like optimizes your ability to be a defender or a thrower.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So with throwing, as the self-proclaimed best thrower in Texas, how do you approach throwing training?
I don't really subscribe to like kung fu throwing or anything fancy like that. For me, it's like a hyper fixation on what I need to work on, and just like going out, and it's all about like volume of throwing. I can tell you, like, for the last month and a half, I've thrown every day for at least an hour, and I think it's helped my throwing substantially.
So when you say like volume of throwing, like what does one of those 1 hour sessions look like?
So I'll say, like, I'll start off like early on when I first started playing for Alamode. I would go out there and I would spend an hour just throwing my flick. And I would just throw 20-yard flicks over and over again until it was like perfect every time, because that's like at the regionals level, like that's all you're throwing, right? At the college level, it's all you're throwing is open side flicks, because everyone forces flick because they don't expect you to have a flick. Now what that looks like is I'll start off with 30 flicks, and I'm talking like very intentional, stepping out every time, trying to get that nice like slight raise to it, trying to hit the chest every time. 30 backhands, which will generally take like 15-20 minutes, and then I spend the rest of the hour working on whatever throws I need to work on. So today it was really windy. I tried to do a lot of hucks. Yesterday it wasn't so windy. I actually like pretty much threw hammers for 30 minutes. So with volume of throwing, I can basically allocate time to whatever I want because I have all the time in the world. So 7 hours a week, I can work on every single one of my throws.
What are the big like project throws right now, if you will?
Oh man. So the obvious one is the Oyo. Like I'm not good enough at Frisbee to be at the level where I'm forced to throw a lot of Oyos, but obviously I need to be ready to be there. And so Oyo is the outside, inside, outside, right? The inside throw that's thrown like an OI. So that's the big project one. And I threw it a lot at last Saturday's pickup. And so hopefully you see it tomorrow at pickup. And then the other one is like, dude, like these Western teams, like the West Coast teams, Western makes it sound like the American teams, like the West Coast teams. We got to play them at PEC West, and I was just watching Revolver play, and I feel like their willingness to, before the person even cuts for it, throw like continuation around throws. So like say disc is in the middle and you swing it to like a handler on the backhand sideline without missing a beat. If their mark gives them the like same third backhand, whether it's 20 yards, 30 yards, it looks like they take it without even thinking about it. And that was our experience playing against Rhino at PEC. It's like they just like revolver Rhino. It feels like they don't miss a beat on like catching that swing and then putting it up, even if the cutter hasn't cut for it yet. And then like the difference between the regionals level and the nationals level is like at regionals, you know, the guys will look around and be like, was that to me? Even though I put it super floaty and anyone can get running, go get it. But at nationals, like there's no hesitation, right? The guys just like, they see the swing going off, they're ready for that continuation and they're hitting it. So that's a long-winded way of me saying like big continuation throws up same thirds. You know, they'd be around throws in a forced middle because, you know, they want to prevent you from throwing OI out the sideline.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when we played double wide early in the season. I guess they were trouble wide at that time. But yeah, I remember one of our teammates, brought up how Joey Wiley just turned and didn't even look at the receiver, but the three in the stack immediately came out for that around. And yeah, that stuck out to me as well. It's just like, this is what like elite level teams are just putting that stuff out there. Not even like, or they're just trusting their system and that the cutter and stuff will be there. So that's definitely interesting. So with throwing, you're not as much of like a drills type guy then?
Yes, I'm more of a grinder. I'm not really like a drill doer.
Yeah. So if you were, you know, like I know in the past, like you coached college and you were the captain of your college team as well. Like when you're teaching a new player how to throw, or maybe a newer player that wants to improve their throws, like what are some of the things that you're kind of going through with them?
Yeah, I think it all starts with like what is the base level for them to need to be able to play the game, and what are like the low hanging fruits in terms of the sport. And so I think you can be a spectacular player just throwing really crisp open flicks and open backhands. And so like I always tell them like you are not allowed to throw anything over the top. And if I show up, you know, 30 minutes early to practice and they're out there throwing and I see anything that's not a flick or a backhand, I immediately like go stop that out. Because I think like the path of least resistance of like getting them as competent as possible, as quickly as possible, is just flicks and backhands over and over again. Yeah.
And I think it's very similar to like I can tell with that philosophy, it's very similar to like the Alamode like overall philosophy. Like our overall strategy, just to kind of put it in a nutshell, was like we'll play very, very simple ultimate until you can prove that you can beat that. Like we're not going to go out and try to run like nothing against Hex, but like we're not going to try to go run Hex. We're not going to go try to run like truck stop. Oh, it's like we'll run a very simple offense until you can prove you can beat that. And it sounds like same thing. It's like I don't need to develop my high release like lefty scoop or whatever. I guess lefty scooper is automatically high release, but yeah, like until I can throw like an open backhand or forehand. Yeah, I think something I want to mention while we're here too is Shelley is helping out with a throwing guide that we're going to come out with. So it's a completely free guide. Going to talk a lot about, you know, mechanics, grip, kind of stepping out, stance, all that stuff. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Again, a free guide. We're partnering with Breakmark Ultimate, the apparel brand, to kind of come out with that. But yeah, do you want to go into kind of some of the, I guess, common mistakes with throwing that you see, some of the stuff that we cover in the guide?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been a few months since we made the guide at this point. But the things that come to mind is just I feel like there's a lot of risk control issues. I feel like a lot of people don't have the ability to throw IO. And so the thing that like I always try to fix people is they try to go from like OIing and they'll try to slowly work their way flat. But instead I find the opposite is more beneficial. So I like show them like, hey, this is what an IO looks like. And I do a really exaggerated IO. And I'm like, start from there and then work your way flat, because I feel like it takes significantly more time to go from OI to flat than it does from IO to flat. The other thing that I preach every day and with my throwing partners that I've been throwing with is just having as much consistency as possible, which is the third time I've mentioned consistency in this podcast alone. But it's like when you change your release point, I feel like that is the most frequent time where you turn the disc. And so like for Alamode, if you look at some of our better handlers, they'll often step out, but and so like they'll have like a nice rise on their disc. It'll often go to their chest and like they get around the mark. And so when they're stepping out, they're like 99% accurate, right? But then it's like the one time where they get lazy and they don't step out. And so they change their wrist orientation a little bit. And that's when they turf it. Or they don't change their wrist orientation and they throw it the same exact way as they would when they were, 2 feet lower, and they'll throw it over the person's head or make them have to make like a really great play. And so, I think like in terms of what to fix for throwing, I would just like homogenize your release point as much as possible for your backhands and flicks. Step out as far as you can, get as far away from the mark as you can, and don't worry so much about like over the tops or throwing and going. Just I try to make throws as catchable as possible. I try to give 100% to the throw, because as much as throwing and going is super fun and is often really beneficial, there are 5 other dudes that are not receiving or throwing the disc that can posture for a continuation. You don't have to as a thrower. I think it's more important to spend the time throwing with higher quality.
Real quick, going to interrupt this episode with the sponsor. It is Breakmark Ultimates. It's an apparel company. You've probably heard of them before. They helped our team, San Antonio Alamode, out with some pretty sick jerseys, the one Shelley's got on here. And then they've also hooked me up with some TOBU Fitness merch. Link in my bio, down in the show notes as well, if you're interested in merch. But I've got the TOBU Fitness hoodies here. So if you're a college team, high school team, club team, whatever it is, looking for jerseys, I think Breakmark Ultimate is a great option. Let's get back to the show. What are your thoughts on, again, I know you're not a big drill guy, but one thing that I've done that's been helpful for me, and then I wish a lot more players would do, is just kind of the idea of just like stepping out and spending time there, kind of being comfortable in that position and throwing from there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think my favorite part about any kind of workout you've put on your Instagram or any workout you've recommended to me is like how applicable it has been to the play that you do. And so like, for example, I do split squat isometrics all the time now, mostly for PT on my knee, but also like I can see the relevance in my throw. And so, not to, praise you on your own podcast, but like what I love about it is like you crawl, walk, run really well, right? Like, hey, there's a crawl phase, there's the walk phase, and like this is how it applies in the game. And it feels really intuitive, and it feels comprehensive. And so I would absolutely recommend that they do isometrics in the position that they're going to end up being in. And then whatever you recommend as the walk, they walk, and then they can run when they get into the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to go, well, thank you for that first off. But yeah, not to go too much deeper into this, but when I was back in Virginia a couple weeks ago, I was playing a lot of pickup with players that I never met before, a lot of college, some club players in that area. And I remember there was this really, really tall kid. And every time he went to break the mark, he would just like scuba over the top. And I was like, goodness, like if only like you had, I don't think it's a lazy thing for him. I think it's literally just like a strength thing. Like his limbs are just so much.
It's a path of least resistance, right? Like always.
Like coaches and captains and stuff might like be preaching like step out. But I think a lot of times it's like, it's not that they're trying to be disobedient or anything. It's just like maybe their body just can't step out, right? Maybe it's like that's such a longer path for him to go down. Like I'm 5'9", if the guy's 6'4", 6'5", it's like a lot farther down to go. So like I think spending time in those lower positions, like for them and for everybody, really could probably be pretty beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, all jokes aside, to talk about like aging and ultimate, like I know you preach like mobility and stuff like that, but like I feel myself like it's like I get up less quickly. I'm able to like do things that I feel like when I was younger like happened without even having to think about it. I have to like think about stepping out now, where I'm sure when I was in college I was just like stepping all the way out without thinking about it. So it's definitely made me more like aware of my lack of mobility. And so Jacob, a guy who I mentioned earlier in the podcast, he's been doing your coaching program, and we played pickup last week. And he was like, I felt so light sprinting. Like it felt so natural sprinting. Whereas often like when I go out there, I'm like, damn, I feel heavy. And so I'm trying to work in some more stretching and some more mobility into my exercises. But like I could see the benefit of Jacob doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's more your 2K age slider. You're starting to slide that up. That's what that is. But yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. Thank you again for that. But the knee injury, that's been something you've been kind of going back and forth with. And I know that the knee injuries are something that's very, very common with most Ultimate players. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like?
Yeah, I mean, luckily it hasn't been injury in the same way. Like, people have like tears that take them out for a long time. I think tall dudes are generally like predisposed to having tendonitis. And so this is the second time in my life I've had tendonitis. First time in the knee, so I have patellar tendonitis. It started about 5 years ago, very manageable, didn't affect me at all. And then towards the end of this club season, it was to the point where like it was waking me up in the middle of the night because it hurt so much, and it was like difficult to go up and down stairs. And it was definitely difficult to play Ultimate.
And what have been things that have like kind of helped you out the most? I know you mentioned the split stance isometrics, but anything else in particular?
Yeah, so I was doing the jumper's knee protocol, which you sent over to me. And I think it was a weekly program, and the one thing that I enjoyed the most, like I'm big on like, you know, the generic lifting, like I love squatting, I love bench presses, I love deadlifting, like that's what I grew up on. And so there was one day a week where it was squatting, split squatting, and then side lunging. And it's just like, at the end, my knee would be like, not screaming, but it'd be like a good 6 out of 10. But the next day it was like a breath of fresh air. I would wake up and my knee would feel like, not that I need that instant gratification, right? But to have that instant gratification the next day of like, it actually felt better pretty much every single time I did that. But I knew it wasn't just that. And so I would still do my isometrics that day, and I would still go do my field work the next day after that. But that's what helped me the most, is just getting comfortable doing a lot of knee bending. And so what that looked like, whether I do my physical therapy, you know, on the medical side, or I do it with what you recommended, a lot of like squatting and just like getting my knee comfortable bending over and over again.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a really great point there, is I think like when people are farther along in like their training, or they've just been an athlete for longer and they become kind of more in tune with their body and they get that better body awareness, is exactly that, where, you know, the pain doesn't necessarily go away, but you're a lot better at telling if the intensity of it has gone down. And that is progress. Like, I think people often miss that, where they're like, oh, Coach Justin, like the pain is still there. But it's like, it was an 8 out of 10 yesterday and it is a 4 out of 10 today. We went down by 50%. Like that is good. Or the other option is like, it might be a 5 out of 10 today and it's still a 5 out of 10 yesterday or tomorrow, but you played, you know, 200% more than you did before. Like if you can increase the amount that you are doing and pain stays the same, that is a huge win. So I think like, yeah, that's an absolutely great point there. But kind of going through the season, then like now that we're in the off season, like you're not playing as much, right? We kind of can control those like variables a lot more. What was it like managing that pain while we were in season?
It was kind of just the willingness to break myself off for the season. Alamode isn't just like, you know, my way of pursuing my passion, Frisbee, but like, unfortunately, you know, fell in love with the team, and like I was willing that like if this was going to be my last club season because of my knee, that I was kind of willing to break myself off for this club season, because I just like care so much about the dudes, like care so much about the team. And so there was not great management during the season. Again, I would never recommend you play through injuries, and I wish I would have gotten to physical therapy earlier. But like I just did the mental gymnastics with myself of like, hey, this sucks, but I know I can run through it. And so like, let's run through it for the boys. Not that I have regrets, but I'm definitely like paying back for it now with like, I'm 4 months into physical therapy. And although my knee still hurts, like you said, it is like maybe 20% of what it was back in September after regionals. Talking to you guys, I'm like sitting there trying to come up with some really inspiring things to say at the end of the season. And my knee is just like screaming at me.
Yeah. If you're comfortable with it, do you want to talk a little bit about what like physical therapy in the Army has been like?
Yeah, so I'm a Air Force physical therapist. She's great. They check the mobility and then kind of like check pain associated with certain workouts. The workouts are like more, I'm not physical trainer like you are, but like more like calisthenics. So where I was doing like isometrics and big lifts with the jumper knee protocol, and then worked in some field work afterwards. Right now it's a lot of like body weight stuff. And so I'm doing standing on a textbook and touching my heel to the ground. I'm doing, they call them like skaters. It looks like I'm ice skating on nothing. I'm doing the band for my hips, right? Like put the band on my ankles and do the crab people walk. And then, gosh dang, what's my last one? Oh, and then I'm doing some weird one where I activate my quad, activate my foot, and just like raise it like this 12 times. And it's the worst thing I've ever done. But again, like I've felt similar benefits that I have with the jumper's knee protocol. And so, again, not that like instant gratification, but I'm 3 weeks into the program now, and I'm definitely seeing the results. very different from what you recommended, but still like appreciate that I'm making progress.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think like the moral of the story there is like, got to be smart about what you're doing, but there's always hope for like, you know, if you have injuries. It's not like in the Q&A I do, like I kind of get a lot of questions with like a similar like undertone of like what's the max amount I can play before like I'm done, or like what's the max amount I can play, you know, how many games in a tournament can I play before it's like unhealthy? And it's like, it's not an arbitrary amount that's too much for people. It's just like, how much can you prepare your body? And like, this is a great example of like, you're doing that stuff to kind of prepare yourself to be ready for next season. It's not like we just wake up with like you can only play 10 years and then you're done thing.
Yeah, like I did check in. So I took a physical test this past week, and I did check in like, hey, is this going to be like healthy for me to do, or like do I need to do the next one? And like there's guidance there, but also like there's no, like you said, there's no specific answer to like, can I play 3 games? Can I play a 4th game? What if I sit once in a while? Like my biggest advice is just like not to be like a hypochondriac and like at any like little pain go straight to the doctor, but really like take everything seriously, take into account your body and take care of it sooner rather than later, because what probably could have been fixed in like 2 months of physical therapy is probably going to turn into like, you know, what has already been 4 months will probably turn into 8 months of physical therapy before I feel like I'm back to 100%.
One thing so this was my first year playing Alamode, so I didn't know you from the previous seasons, but one thing I did hear was that there was a great progression from Shelley not warming up to Shelley now leading the team warm up. Can you walk me through what your mindset there was like?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're young, you know, now that I'm 28 years old, I was 27 during the season, you're invincible, right? Like I had never warmed up in my life. For the first year, I didn't wear cleats, right? Like I just, taking care of my body did not occur to me. And I think in acknowledgement of both, like I am willing to make significant changes in my life to get better. And so I think part of warming up is like getting better and playing better, but also like the longevity of playing for a long time. And again, I had to like acknowledge that part of being able to play for a long time and playing quality for a long time is doing a better job taking care of myself. And so although you saw it present itself in the form of me warming up, it also exists in my diet and how seriously I take my workouts outside of Frisbee. So you just saw one piece of a greater life change to take Frisbee more seriously.
Yeah, I think it's awesome though. That's awesome. It's awesome. Cool. Last question. It's the one that I like to do to end all the podcasts now, but we kind of talked a lot about the answers, right? But I think what's most admirable about people is like when they can just ask better questions instead of just having the answers. Like I want to know what are the questions that keeps, you know, LeBron James up at night thinking about basketball. So for you, Shelley, like what are the questions that you're kind of pondering about Ultimate at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm the LeBron James of Ultimate, so you're asking the right guy. I think, so we talked earlier about like at the college level treating Frisbee like a hobby. And so I think for the first like 3 years of Frisbee, I treated Frisbee like a hobby, and then spent the next 7 years like trying to figure out how to get better. And a lot of it was like trying to figure out how to get better, like better skills and stuff like that, like more athletic. But I think the one thing I never stopped and like really considered was how hard am I trying at any given time? I think a lot of people are like suffice to go around giving 80%, especially at the college level, because a lot of times you have smaller teams and, you know, the better players will play savage. I was just watching college nationals, and like some of the best players will go like 3-on-1 off. And so it's not intuitive for them to go 100%. Where I feel like in other sports that we grew up under the context of like, this is a sport, not a hobby, it's so intuitive to go 100%. Like I was playing pickup basketball and there's no question, like I'm sprinting, I'm rebounding as hard as I can. And so recently for Frisbee, for me, it's not just like, how do I get better, but it's also like, how do I be more intentional about giving 100% all the time? And so for me, it's like, the question I'm asking myself is, where in my game could I give more effort, more energy? And the answer to that has recently been marking and throwing. I always thought I had like a good mark, but I've over the last year have made some significant changes to making my mark a lot better. And then throwing was the other one, where it's like I used to throw and go a lot, or like not step out to save energy, because I'm also kind of a little tall, like I'm 6'2", so at the regionals level, like that's pretty tall. And it's like, yeah, I'll throw a scooper instead of stepping out for a backhand, but it's exerting energy in the little ways that, you know, makes the throw easier for your cutter to catch And if the throw is easier, they'll drop it less. And so in the long run, you're playing less defense, you're saving a lot more energy. And so it's finding ways to invest more energy to save more energy in the long run. And so I'm just questioning myself, like, where else am I being lazy? How else can I like try harder instead of just being better?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I know that's something you kind of brought up throughout the season. That's made me think a little bit too. So yeah, I think that's a great question there.
Yeah, I think one of your videos is like how to get better at defense, like try harder. It's like do have more intensity, and like I really subscribe to that.
Yeah, well, some of the comments on that one might not agree, but I appreciate the praise.
I don't read the comment section, so I didn't know.
There we go. Well, cool. Like I said earlier in the show, we're working on a throwing guide, partnering with Breakmark Ultimate. So you'll be able to learn a lot more about Shelley's philosophies, theories, just kind of coaching practicality on throwing in that. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But Shelley, if people want to ask you more questions, if they want to find you, where can they find you or contact you?
That's a great question. I am not an influencer like you are, and so I think I'm less available through social media spaces. But if people really do have questions, they're welcome to reach out to me via Facebook, Instagram. I don't know if you could plug like my email or my phone at the bottom in the comments or something, but yeah, I'm happy to have people reach out if they're interested in asking me any questions.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put it all down in the show notes so people can take a look. But yeah, Shelley, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome.
You've been listening to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. Our passion is to be your guide in elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate Frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. No hype, just substance. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Instagram and YouTube at TOBU Fitness. And to get info on one-on-one coaching and training programs, hit the website at tobufitness.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time on the TOBU Fitness Podcast.